somebody should alert Lincoln Riley of Jackson Arnold getting his 5th star because maybe he thought that Oklahoma was incapable of getting 5 stars at quarterback. I don't know, without him there. But that seems to be in line with his narrative of Oklahoma football versus what he now has at USC. I don't know that he would have made these statements. That would be we all know what the answer would be had Lincoln Riley been asked about comparing the USC and Oklahoma jobs 2 years ago, let's say, and what was capable of being brought to campus, those two respective universities. But for those of you, give us a pass on this one, everyone. Who we seem to have a divided audience when it comes to Lincoln Riley talk. Some of it is very intriguing to some, and I certainly understand completely all of you who say, move on. We don't want to hear about Lincoln Riley. Coaches another team. Absolutely. He just seems to, as to your point before we started to record, Jason, he seems to stir things up or bring things up that tie him back to Oklahoma, and this seems to be a regular occurrence with him.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, he's turning into. I think obviously he's always going to, for the foreseeable future, be a villain in Oklahoma's eyes. But I think just nationally, I think he's becoming more and more of a villain of college football. And to your point, Mark, I think we all, as we talk through this each and every week, we all want to try to move on from this, but we want to bring everyone that tunes in here the news that's going on within Oklahoma football, um and exactly what's going on. And to your point, every time it looks like there's going to be some die down of that, either he says something or someone else says something, and more often than not, it's him taking interviews about the situation and just not wanting to let it die. And some have seen it, but there's a specific blurb into this interview that he took with Dennis Dodds, that where he talks about Oklahoma's roster, in the playoff years compared to that of other teams. And his and just paraphrasing his quote, he talks about in his 4 playoff stops with Oklahoma being at best the third of the 4 rosters, through those seasons. And then at the very last, he takes a little bit of a shot at some of his previous players when he really kind of talks about he couldn't imagine building it couldn't be a setting where they could build a better roster at couldn't build a better roster at USC than he's built at Norman. So again, a little bit of a shot towards the Oklahoma program, some of his ex-players, and things like that. So when you, I think a lot of, as we talked about before, Mark, there's not really any debate that it's easier to recruit, to USC in Los Angeles than it is to Norman, Oklahoma, right? I mean, there's a lot of advantages that some of these kids have, but at the same time, USC hasn't had the level of success just as recent as Oklahoma has as well. So, it'll be interesting to see how this continues to unfold, as we seem to talk about this every single week. But it's going to be very interesting to see, how these two teams play out this year. I think there's a lot of national belief, Mark, that this Oklahoma team is going to take a fairly significant step back in 2022. Um, and I don't necessarily think that's the thought with the media inside the state of Oklahoma, but I think nationally, even Joel Klatt, came out a couple weeks ago and talked about he thought that this was going to be the least talented or the worst Oklahoma team that there's been in the last 20 years. And anybody that follows Klatt knows he has always been very, very very complimentary of not only Lincoln Riley, but Oklahoma as a program overall. So, and then when you look at the other side of it, Mark, I think there's a lot of people nationally that just think, okay, this USC team is going to be outstanding. They're going to be phenomenal. Just a great offensive team next year. So it'll be interesting to see as we get into the season, certainly as we get into August when camps open up, what things look like from both sides of this. And we've also talked about the ability of the guys that Oklahoma has on campus from a defensive staff perspective, is an upgrade over the previous staff. So when you look at that, and then when you look at the defensive staff that Lincoln Riley has built with his team, that is predominantly people that was on his staff at Oklahoma the last few years. So it's going to be like I said, it's going to be interesting to watch and see what that looks like. I think both teams have a couple of early matchups, and then not necessarily the non-conference, but the early season. I think USC has Stanford second week of the year. Oklahoma has Nebraska third week of the year. So before they get into conference play, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see the trajectory of these two teams through 2022 and obviously beyond.